Right now, you're deep inside the Great Pyramid, standing in a passage barely wider than your shoulders. And directly above your head, there is a room. A room roughly the length of a passenger jet, sealed inside solid stone for 4,500 years. No door, no corridor, no way in that anyone has ever found. And here's the part that kept me up at night. We didn't find it by digging. We found it by catching tiny particles born in the depths of distant stars. Particles that rained down through millions of tons of limestone and revealed a hollow where solid rock was supposed to be. That's the claim that pulled me under. A void as long as the Grand Gallery itself, hidden above the tourists' heads, confirmed in a peer-reviewed paper in the journal Nature on the 2nd of November 2017. Not a legend, not a psychic's vision, a measurement. Stay with me, because by the end I'll hand you the one detail that 3 separate scientific teams recorded and still cannot explain, and I'll show you why one of the most famous men in all of Egyptology tried so hard to make it disappear. It was a Tuesday night, close to 2 in the morning, and I was reading that Nature paper on my phone in a dark kitchen, when a single number stopped me cold. 30 meters. That's the minimum length they gave for the empty space they'd found. 30 meters of nothing, sitting inside the most studied building on Earth, and until that year, not one human being in recorded history had known it was there. I put the phone down, I picked it back up. I read the same paragraph maybe 6 times, waiting for the sentence that said, "Of course, we already knew about this." That sentence never came. I should tell you where I started, because I did not start as a believer. I started as the guy rolling his eyes at pyramid videos. I'd seen all of them. Aliens, lost technology, secret chambers full of gold. I assumed this was more of the same, another recycled rumor dressed up in dramatic music. So I did what I always do when something annoys me. I went looking for the boring explanation, fully expecting to find it in an afternoon. Instead, I lost the better part of 2 years. Let me back up and explain how anyone finds a room without touching the wall in front of it, because this was the first thing that broke my skepticism. The technique is called muon tomography, and once you understand it, you cannot unsee it. Muons are subatomic particles created when cosmic rays, streaming in from deep space, smash into the top of our atmosphere. They fall toward the ground constantly, silently, passing through your body by the dozens every second as you read this. And here is the beautiful part. When a muon passes through empty air, it loses almost no energy. When it passes through dense stone, it loses a lot, and many of them get absorbed entirely. So if you lay down a special detector and simply count the muons arriving from every direction, more of them will come through where the material is thin or hollow, and fewer will come through where the rock is solid. Point that detector up at a pyramid, wait long enough, and the sky itself develops your X-ray. The team that did this called themselves ScanPyramids. It launched in October of 2015, a partnership between the Heritage Innovation Preservation Institute in France and the Faculty of Engineering at Cairo University, operating with the blessing of the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. And the man whose detectors mattered most to me was Kunihiro Morishima, a physicist from Nagoya University in Japan. His team placed sheets of a material called nuclear emulsion film inside the pyramid, down in a small room called the Queen's Chamber, and in the passage leading to it. These films are almost like old photographic plates. Every muon that punches through leaves a track, and by developing the film and measuring the angle of every single track, you can reconstruct exactly which directions the particles came from. They left the films in the dark, inside the pyramid, for months. Then they pulled them out, developed them, and counted. And in the data, coming from one specific patch of sky above the Grand Gallery, there were far too many muons. Way more than solid limestone should ever allow through. Something up there was letting the particles pass. Something empty. Now, I want you to understand why that gave me chills. And it's because of what sits directly below that void. The Grand Gallery. If you've never been inside the Great Pyramid, the Grand Gallery is the single most jaw-dropping space in the whole structure. It's a soaring corridor that climbs up into the heart of the pyramid at an angle, 46.5 meters long, and its ceiling rises to about 8.5 meters overhead in a series of stepped stone shelves called a corbelled vault. Standing in it feels like standing inside the ribcage of something enormous. It is, without argument, one of the greatest architectural achievements of the ancient world. And the newly discovered void was almost a mirror of it. At least 30 meters long, the ScanPyramids team said, with a cross-section they described as similar to the Grand Gallery itself, sitting just above it and running along the same axis. Read that again slowly. It's not a little pocket, it's not a crack. It's a second cathedral-sized space, stacked right on top of the first one, and nobody had ever known. I remember sitting there thinking, all right, calm down. Old buildings have gaps. Maybe it's nothing. But that thought didn't survive contact with the next fact, which is that ScanPyramids didn't use just one method. They used 3 completely different detection technologies, run by 3 separate teams that developed their data independently. Morishima's nuclear emulsion films from Nagoya, a set of scintillator detectors from the Japanese high-energy physics laboratory KEK, and gas detectors from the French Alternative Energies and Atomic Energy Commission, known as the CEA. 3 technologies, 3 teams, 3 different physical principles for catching muons. And all 3 saw the same void. In the same place, at the same size. That's the moment my afternoon debunk turned into a 2-year obsession. Because you can dismiss one team. You can dismiss one instrument as a glitch. You cannot easily dismiss 3 independent methods all pointing a finger at the same empty space inside a mountain of stone. When that Nature paper landed in 2017, it wasn't published by a fringe outfit. The co-authors included Mehdi Tayyubi of the HIP Institute and Hani Halal of Cairo University, and it survived the peer review of one of the most demanding scientific journals on the planet. So I had my anomaly, a giant hollow, confirmed 3 ways, above the Grand Gallery, in a building we had supposedly mapped down to the last stone, and that raised the question that would drag me deeper than I ever meant to go. If it's real, and it clearly is, then what is it? What's inside a 30-meter void that no one has entered in 45 centuries? But before I could chase what it might be, I had to be honest with myself about what it probably was. Because there's a very ordinary explanation for this, and for a long stretch of this journey, it's the one I wanted to be true. Here's where I need to talk to you directly, especially if you're the kind of viewer who's sitting there thinking, come on, there's a simple answer to this. It's just a gap in the stones. I get it. I was you. So let me give the boring explanation its fair shot, because I gave it more than a fair shot. I spent weeks trying to make it work. The explanation is something called a relieving space, or a construction gap, and it's based on something real that already exists inside the pyramid. Above the king's chamber, the burial room at the pyramid's core, the ancient builders constructed 5 separate compartments stacked one on top of another, each roofed with massive granite beams. We've known about these for a long time. Their purpose is engineering. All that weight of stone pressing down from above would have crushed the flat ceiling of the king's chamber. So the builders created these stacked hollow chambers to redirect the load, to channel the crushing force out and around the room below, like a series of stone shock absorbers. It's brilliant, and it's completely mundane. Nobody's buried in them. They're structural. So the tidy explanation for the big void goes like this. The Grand Gallery is a huge open space. All the stone above it has to be supported somehow. Maybe this void is just another relieving structure, an architectural trick to take the weight off the gallery's ceiling, the same way those 5 compartments protect the king's chamber. Empty by design, boring by design, nothing inside but the genius of ancient engineers doing their jobs. And honestly, I loved that answer. It let me close the tab. It let me go back to sleep. Except it didn't hold, and I need to show you exactly where it fell apart for me. Because it fell apart on the numbers. The relieving chambers above the king's chamber are relatively small. Low spaces, cramped compartments you'd have to crawl through, purpose-built to spread load across a short span. The big void is nothing like that, 30 meters, minimum, possibly much longer. With a cross-section the researchers themselves compared to the Grand Gallery, which is a soaring corbelled hall, not a crawl space. If all you needed was to relieve pressure, you would never build something that enormous. It's structural overkill of an absurd degree. It's like being told a small crossbeam is holding up your ceiling, and then discovering the beam is actually a hidden ballroom. The scale is wrong for the boring answer. And then there was the second problem, the one that truly ended the debate in my own head. The angle. In the years after the first announcement, researchers went back to the muon data and tried to pin down the void's exact orientation, and the analysis suggested it might be inclined, tilted, running upward at an angle rather than lying flat. A relieving space to take vertical load would most logically sit horizontally, spreading weight sideways. An inclined space, climbing through the pyramid at a slope, echoing the exact rising line of the Grand Gallery beneath it, is a much harder thing to explain as a mere accident of engineering. It starts to look intentional. It starts to look like it was meant to lead somewhere. That gap between the official answer and the measurement haunted me. Stone nobody can explain, and evidence quietly left out, so I gathered 2 years of digging into these books. They show how new methods read stone the old story skips. Tonight, pull up that Nature paper and check it yourself. They're called First Threshold, Deep Signal, and Hidden Systems. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description, or the pinned comment. Now, the moment the comfortable story broke for me, that's the point where I stopped being able to tell myself the comfortable story. Not because I wanted magic. I didn't. I would have been perfectly happy with a structural gap, but the structural gap was the wrong size and possibly the wrong shape, and I couldn't force the pieces to fit no matter how badly I wanted to sleep. So I did what any obsessive does. I went looking for what the experts said next, assuming there'd be a rush to answer the question, a race to figure out what this thing was. And that's when the story took a turn I genuinely did not expect. That's when I stopped worrying about the void and started worrying about the reaction to it. Because here's what should have happened after a discovery like this. Every Egyptologist on Earth should have been demanding a follow-up, a plan, a careful way to learn more, and some were. But the loudest voice in the field, one of the most powerful figures in Egyptian archaeology, did something else entirely. He tried to talk everyone out of caring. Zahi Hawass. If you've watched any documentary about ancient Egypt in the last 30 years, you've seen him. Former Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs, the face of Egyptian archaeology for a generation, a man with enormous influence over what does and doesn't get investigated inside those monuments. And when the Big Void announcement broke in 2017, Hawass, who chaired the scientific committee overseeing the ScanPyramids project, came out publicly and downplayed it hard. He argued the pyramid was full of gaps and cavities left over from construction, that this was simply empty space between stones, that there was, in his framing, essentially nothing there worth the excitement. He questioned the wording. He objected to the word void being called a discovery at all. Now, I want to be fair, because being fair is the whole reason anyone should trust a word I say. Hawass has spent his life protecting these monuments, and there is a real, legitimate fear behind some of that caution. Overhype invites reckless people who want to drill holes in a World Heritage Site chasing treasure. Scientists are trained to be conservative, extraordinary claims and all that, so part of me understood the instinct to pump the brakes. But the more I read, the less it sat right. Because there's a difference between saying, we don't yet know what this is, so let's be careful, and saying, there's basically nothing here, let's not get carried away. The first is science, the second is a door quietly closing, and the physics was not on the side of nothing. 3 independent detector technologies had recorded a 30-meter anomaly. You don't dismiss that as a random gap between blocks, unless you'd really prefer not to look at what a 30-meter gap might mean. And that's the thread that started to unravel everything for me. The shift from a mystery about a building to a mystery about people. Why would the most influential man in the field be so eager to shrink the biggest discovery inside the Great Pyramid in a century? What is it about a sealed room that makes certain people want to seal it a second time, this time with words? I don't think it's a grand conspiracy with villains twirling mustaches. I think it's something quieter and, honestly, more frustrating. I think it's about control. About whose name gets attached to the next great find. About the tension between outside physicists, wielding technology the old guard didn't grow up with, and an establishment that has spent decades deciding what the official story of these monuments is allowed to be. When a team of particle physicists from France and Japan finds something inside your pyramid that you missed for your entire career, there's a very human temptation to insist it can't be important. And every time the void got called nothing, the pressure to actually go in and check faded a little more. But here's what I've learned chasing these cases. The evidence doesn't care who's comfortable, and the ScanPyramids team was not done. They had already turned their detectors toward another part of the pyramid, the north face, near the original ancient entrance, and what they found there is where this whole journey finally paid off. Because for the first time in this story, they didn't just detect an empty space through millions of tons of rock, they got a camera inside one. Let me set the scene, because this is the discovery that made me exhale for the first time in months. On the north face of the Great Pyramid, above the entrance that tourists use, there's a formation of massive limestone blocks arranged in a distinctive shape, angled slabs that meet at a peak like the roof of a house. Archaeologists call them chevrons, and they'd been visible on the outside of the pyramid for as long as anyone had been looking. Everyone assumed they were decorative, or that they protected the known entrance passage. Nobody knew what, if anything, was behind them. The ScanPyramids team pointed their muon detectors at that spot, and once again, the particles came through where they shouldn't have. There was a hollow behind the chevrons. So this time, they decided to do something they could not do with the deep, big void. They decided to look. They found a joint, a narrow gap between two of the stones, and through it they threaded a slender endoscope, a tiny camera on a flexible cable, the kind of thing doctors use to see inside the human body. They fed it through the crack in the ancient stone, into the dark, and they watched the screen. And there it was, a corridor, about 9 meters long, roughly 2 meters wide, with a ceiling built in that same peaked, gabled shape, the chevron stones forming the roof, running back into the body of the pyramid from behind the north face. Empty, unfinished floor, untouched. A passage no human eye had seen since the pyramid was sealed around 2560 BCE. They published it in the journal Nature Communications on the 2nd of March 2023. They called it the North Face Corridor. And I remember staring at those grainy endoscope frames, this dark stone tunnel opening up out of nowhere, and feeling the hair stand up on my arms, because this was no longer a statistical blip in muon counts. This was a photograph. This was a room, confirmed, real, exactly where the particles said it would be. And that's when it hit me why this mattered so much more than just one more empty corridor. Think about what it proved. The method worked. The muons had said empty space, and the camera found empty space. Precisely where predicted, exactly the size predicted. Every doubt about whether these detectors could really see hidden voids, gone. The technique had just been ground truth by an endoscope, which meant the other detection, the big one, the 30-meter void above the Grand Gallery, could not be waved away anymore either. If the muons were right about the North Face corridor, and now we had video proof that they were, then the muons were almost certainly right about the enormous void deeper inside. But here's the finale. The detail that surfaced in that 2023 research, and still gives me a chill when I say it out loud. The engineers cannot explain what the North Face corridor is for. Structurally, the leading idea is that these gabled corridors redistribute weight, the same relieving logic as before. But this one sits above the entrance, and there's a growing suspicion among the researchers that a passage like this wouldn't be built to protect nothing. In their published work, the ScanPyramids scientists raised the possibility, carefully, in the measured language of a peer-reviewed journal, that a structure like this may have been built to relieve the weight above something else, something below it, or beyond it, an undiscovered chamber, a room the corridor exists to shield. And that reframed everything I thought I understood about the big void. Because if a 9-meter corridor near the surface might be protecting a hidden chamber, then what is a 30-meter inclined void, mirroring the Grand Gallery, doing in the very heart of the pyramid? We have now confirmed, with cosmic particles and then verified with a camera, that the Great Pyramid contains at least one large space nobody knew about and cannot fully explain, and strong evidence of a second, far larger one that no camera has ever reached. Both of them sealed. Both of them silent. Both of them sitting there right now, above the heads of the thousands of tourists who file through that pyramid every single day, none of them knowing they're walking beneath rooms that have kept their secret for 4,500 years. The big void has still never been entered. Nobody has put a camera inside it. It is too deep, buried behind too much solid stone, with no known passage and no gap to thread an endoscope through. It remains exactly what it was on that Tuesday night when a number stopped me cold. A confirmed, measured, 30-meter emptiness in the middle of the most famous structure on Earth. And we have no idea what's in it. We only know, now, beyond reasonable doubt, that it is truly there. That's the thing I chased for 2 years. And here it is in your hands. Not a rumor. Not a guess. A discovery made by counting particles from dying stars, confirmed by 3 separate teams, proven real by a camera in a crack in the stone, and quietly minimized by the very people who should have been shouting about it from the rooftops. The Great Pyramid is not fully explored. It never was. We just told ourselves it was. Because the alternative meant admitting how much we still don't know about the people who built it. If you've made it this far, you already know you're not the type to accept the easy answer just because someone with a title handed it to you. You're the type who reads the footnote, who asks why the loudest voice in the room wanted everyone to look away. That's the whole reason this channel exists, and it's the reason I keep digging. So let me ask you something specific, and I actually want you to answer this one. That North Face corridor, with its peaked ceiling, sitting above the entrance, that the engineers think might be shielding a chamber we haven't found yet. What do you think is under it? And the 30-meter void above the Grand Gallery that no camera has ever entered. Do you think it's an empty relieving space? Or do you think we're standing beneath something no one alive has ever seen? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because I read them, and the best theories I've ever heard came from people like you. If you want to keep going down these tunnels with me, the ones the experts closed and the evidence refuses to let stay shut, then come with me. There's a community of us now, people who won't let the easy story be the final story. Because the next case I'm chasing involves a shaft inside this very same pyramid, a passage so narrow they had to build a robot to crawl up it, and what that robot's camera found on the other side of a small stone door with 2 copper pins is something the official record has still never truly explained. I'll see you there. Before you go, one thing. What you watched was just the overview. Inside the Unexplained Society, I continue the full investigation into that void right where we stopped tonight. You can ask me your own questions in there, and a real person, me, answers you myself, never a machine. And you won't be alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. You can cancel anytime. Come join me. If you thought that was strange, wait until you see what scientists uncovered beneath those famous Easter Island heads. What they found there changes everything we believed. It's starting right here now.